Jody.
Oops, sorry. I did say I wasn't coming.
We're always ready for you.
No, I'm good. I'm going to go find down from there. Nope, I'm good.
One, two, three.
Wait, one more. Jody, you have a time you need to go? Soft?
Around 7.
6:05?
Yeah, 6:05. Hi, bye.
Going to sing at the library.
Oh, nice. We are live, just so you know.
Yeah,
Thanks.
It's okay. I'll tell people they should go to the library tonight to hear Ben Goldfarb, Hastings High School graduate.
Yeah.
Great book.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, we're at quorum.
Oh, We're all
We need
you're
a
all on
number
the same
4.
train.
Yeah.
Same bus, same plane. Same.
Apologies, apologies.
No, not at all. All right, let it rip. So we've got quorum. So I'm going to open, call to order a regular meeting of the Hastings and Hudson Board of Education for November 20th, 2023.
Thanks, Patrick.
We have project share tomorrow, right, coming up, and we've got students who are busy with it. So we're going to lead off tonight with our student report. So Kai or Eliana, whoever wants to begin, feel free.
I go for it. Perfect. So, quick middle school update. The 7th and 8th grade musical Godspell just went out this past weekend. The show on Friday and Saturday, the house filled up really quickly. The show is based off of a series of parables that have been set to music, and the middle schoolers pulled it off with some really excellent acting, dancing, and singing. The Harvest Moon Ball was much earlier this month. We just haven't had the chance to talk about it yet. It was on the 4th. It was a night filled with Hastings musicians, including performances from the high school and middle school jazz bands, as well as Symphonia, the high school selective orchestra, and my own Hudson, also known as the Hastings Klezmer Band. There was swing dancing and sing-alongs. It was a really great time for everybody. The fall sports banquet was on Thursday the 9th. It's this annual get-together of all of the sports teams. It's filled with games, speeches, and a group meal. I wasn't there personally, but I heard great things and know that it was an excellent end to the season. Additionally, on sports, the winter teams have officially finished their cuts and have set their teams for the season. Boys basketball has their first scrimmage against Ardsley and Hudson tomorrow, so we wish them luck. And the high school one-acts held their auditions this past week on Friday the 17th. The one-acts were super popular in the middle school, and they were just recently brought to the high school by current senior Eric Gallup. They're a really popular way to act, direct, or join the tech crew without committing to a full show, and there was a fantastic turnout of a lot of really talented performers. And lastly, my fellow 11th grader and dear friend, Caitlin Thomas, has added yet another award to her repertoire after placing first out of all Section 1 runners this past Saturday at the New York Federation Championships. She ran 5,000 meters, or 3 miles, in 19 minutes, which is crazy, and that placed her 13th out of 287 runners, so congrats to Caitlin.
Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a PL update. So we had on the evening of November 8th, we had our PL Parent Fishbowl, which was an opportunity for the freshman parents to get a taste of what our weekly lunch meetings with the freshmen look like. So both the freshmen and their parents attended, and at the beginning of the night, all the PLs talked briefly about the history and the setup of PL, and then everyone split up into their PL groups. So it was a fishbowl activity, meaning that parents got the opportunity to ask their kids questions, and their kids got the opportunity to ask their parents questions, and it was a super fun night, and we discovered we have a little bit of a Board of Education connection with Ms. Bucher, so I hope you enjoyed it.
I did, I loved it.
She was in my group.
That was great.
Okay, so the spring musical interest meeting is coming up on Tuesday, November 28th at 3:15 in the cafeteria. Anyone interested in being part of the cast or crew is encouraged to attend. We also have HOH hikes coming up, so organized through Hastings Kids involved doing service. This upcoming Thanksgiving break is the annual HOH hikes, which is actually a program that I coordinate. HOH Hikes is a project where high school volunteers take elementary school students on walks through the hillside woods. So we have 3 hikes scheduled from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on November 24th, 25th, and 26th. And you can still sign your kids up by emailing hastingsonhudsonkids@gmail.com. And so one of the reasons that our Board of Education meeting is Monday night and not tomorrow Tuesday is because the annual Project Share's annual Thanksgiving dinner is happening tomorrow. The event is hosted in the Cochran Gym, and for 34 years, Project Share has hosted this dinner for the homeless, where adults and children will be treated to a wonderful Thanksgiving meal prepared and served by Hastings students, staff, parents, and residents. The cooking and meal prep has been happening all weekend, so we look forward to a really good event tomorrow night. And of course, Thanksgiving break is just days away. So the student body is very excited. So Kai and I want to wish everyone a restful and safe couple of days off.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you both, and feel free to make.
Yeah, we kind of have to run.
Thank you both for being
Wait,
here.
I just have a quick comment. I just want to say that I really appreciate, Aliana, the peer leadership, because I didn't really understand what peer leadership was. I remember talking to Jody and Patrick about it, and I was like, I don't even really know what happens. I wish every parent had been there to really understand and see. I'm particularly lucky that my Aliana has you, so that was really good. But yeah, that was really, I'd like you to tell everybody that I thought, like, they were so funny in the way it was organized. Everything about it was a great night. So really appreciate all the work that went into that, because I know that was really for the parents to understand. So appreciate that. And thank you, Kai, for mentioning the Godspell, the musical, because my son was in it, so I have a particular, affinity for it. But I just have to say that we are so lucky to have Lori, because it was insane, like the amount of kids, because of modified sports and other things, that they just could not participate. She had, the conflict sheet she had was incredible. Some of the kids had been on stage practicing like 4 times before the actual show, and it was, you would never have known that being in the audience. It was amazing. It was wonderful. It was such the way she interpreted it to be about, the planet and all that, everything was about it. And so Lori and Jillian and Phyllis, everybody who's part of it, but I really appreciate the work that they did. And I know that you guys work with her a lot in the high school, so really lucky to have her. I don't know anybody else that could have pulled off something like that, so it was great.
Thank you. Nice notes. Thank you both.
May
I'm sorry.
May I touch on something we potentially introduced for a future meeting?
Yes.
Do you want to introduce it then?
Sure.
It's the idea of the book. Maybe you explain to the board what we're doing with the book they had at the retreat.
Okay,
Just,
so-
you don't have to go on the content yet, but you can.
Okay.
You're both dramatic. You can kind of set the stage for later. Or
Okay,
something.
setting the stage. So this summer, Kai and I read The Governance Core as well. And so we've been discussing it with Dr. McCursey. We've had some meetings. And so in the future, we're going to talk about some of the things we really took away from and we really thought were really rewarding, and share that with you. Yeah.
And you all are the case study. You may not know that. Not by name, but no, it's really been quite a remarkable discussion we've been having.
Great, amazing.
Yeah. There were at least, 15 takeaways today that you cited, right, with text references and everything with some
kept going.
interpretation. So that's what I do instead of running the district. I just,
Right.
But in all seriousness, they agree that at some point might come back and share their observations.
That's great, I love it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Now we will let you go.
All right, now you can go. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good break, everybody.
Thanksgiving. Moving on to announcements. These are listed on board docs. Are there anything you want to pull out of here? No? Okay.
Well, you did the most important, which is the project share.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And moving on to our presentation, we have Laura Sullivan and Mary Angela Sanchez. Oh, okay, she's doing this one. And this is going to be about, am I correct in saying it's a pilot program for school mental health? Would that be fair to?
Okay, hi everyone.
evening.
Maria Angela Sanchez, Assistant Director of Special Ed. I just want to thank the board and community for their time this evening. I'm excited to share some news of a meaningful partnership aimed at our students. And the idea is to support all of our students at Hastings. As a New York State certified school psychologist, I've witnessed a concerning trend in reports from faculty and administration about students struggling with social emotional well-being due to the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Reflecting on my experiences, I recognized the need for additional support and drew upon my positive interactions with the school-based mental health clinics while I worked in the New York City Department of Education. Leveraging my network and expertise, I initiated the application process in collaboration with Andrus. Thrillingly, we are now in the final stages of a state approval and anticipate having a licensed social worker from Andrus supporting Hastings students by early 2024. So on this slide, it just talks about the current school-based mental health clinics that exist, and it discusses their programs and a little bit of detail about that. Building on the long-standing community partnerships between Andrus and Hastings, it feels like a natural and welcome development to have an Andrus clinician supporting our schools district. The clinician will be available at Hillside Elementary School 2 days per week and the Middle High School campus 3 days per week, offering outpatient services through referrals and utilizing medical insurance for billing purposes. The research underscores the positive impact of mental health support on student engagement, making this clinic particularly beneficial for those at higher risk. The clinician will also play a pivotal role in collaborating with the school, developing and monitoring intervention plans, and facilitating referrals in the community when necessary. Our goal is to address the service delivery delay reported by families facing challenges in accessing services outside of the schools due to the wait lists. I'm thrilled to announce the establishment of the mental health clinic at Hastings. This initiative aims to foster positive social emotional well-being and equip our students with foundational skills to thrive. Recognizing the importance of mental health on par with physical health, we anticipate a direct and positive impact on our students' development. I look forward to witnessing the transformative effects of these mental health services on our students. And if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
Let me just do a little framing, then so immense compliments to Marie Angela on this. I mean, she identified the issue, and as she touched on earlier, given her extensive expertise in New York City schools as a truly licensed school psychologist, said we can do better here in Hastings, and went about this. We've worked on this in full collaboration with the union. This is an add to. It's not replacing at all any of our good work of our social workers and psychologists, but it's adding to that. And as has been mentioned here, is tightening, shortening that time frame between when a need's identified and then how the family can access the need. So, I mean, hats off to where we are on this, and through the grant process, 7-8 months of work, both work internally to assure people this was an add, not a replacement, and essential to our students. Sorry, I just had to frame it a bit.
No, thank you.
It was just basically kind of a question along the lines of what you just set up, Bill. And it's basically, so how do these interplay with our existing counselors, social workers, psychologists, like in the sense that it's a supplemental person coming in, like where do they come into play amongst that infrastructure that we already have at play? So and understanding we need as many staff.
Yeah, we want all hands on deck. Right. It's a referral process. So the clinicians who are already in the schools would make or a teacher or an administrator could make a referral to the clinician through Andrus. That we'll refer to it as the mental health clinic. And then they would reach out to the parents to get their consent, and it would be, the services would be delivered through insurance reimbursement. So just like an outpatient clinic, except that it's in school. So we have a pocket of families who are having difficulty accessing outpatient services due to wait lists. So this would really streamline the process specifically for those families, but it's accessible to everybody.
So when you say services, what services would that be?
Different therapeutic supports, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. It's a licensed social worker, so whatever therapeutic modality they deem to be the most appropriate for the student.
Okay.
So it's kind of that our folks who are in-house would service to screen and say these are families or students who would benefit from services, and they might not be able to access services here. they would necessarily normally be outside of school, and so this additional person is somebody who could provide those services.
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
a
that kind
broad
of sums
shape?
it up,
Okay,
more
thank
or
you.
less, yeah.
I may have misunderstood this, but what if people don't have insurance?
Then they would work with the county to support through Children's Health First or whatever. There are programs in place for families that don't have insurance, and this clinician could work with the families in accessing the paperwork, more or less, that you need to file to get those services.
The other possibility, though, is that people could have insurance, but it might not cover this particular service. I mean,
I was thinking the same thing, Jody.
Potentially, but
I think the key part is that this person would be able to facilitate all of those hiccups that the families are currently experiencing outside of school. So we have all of the supports in school, and when they want to, perhaps, there's a lot of wait lists to get in to see people outside of school. And then to your point of the insurance, this person could be a key facilitator to navigate all of those barriers that the families are experiencing outside of the day.
Now I'm jumping in, but I think even logistically, this is really helpful to families that, getting to like Yonkers, White Plains, or wherever the service may be. This, helps also with that, because a lot of people, not everyone has transportation or access to it. And then I do think, the fact that Andrews is currently in many school districts that are much more high needs than Hastings, my guess is that this is the same organization that they either probably take most, unlike like a lot of therapists probably do take more insurance, and then probably work with, many families in that. Like that's the, if you see where they currently are, that would be my guess, that they're going to be experts in that.
Yeah, I also think that, I thank you so much. I just want to say
Yeah,
that
of course.
first, and I think that it's also an addition, regardless. That's how I see it, and also I know that I'm sure you've done this where families in New York City, when you were there, you find a way to connect. And with children, there's always a special, if their parents cannot even afford it, there's always a way to support them.
Right.
So
There are workarounds.
Yeah, there is always some clause that would benefit them. So I don't doubt that kind of support. But the question that I had was, in certain behaviors, how will parents be informed in a way that they can help? I'm not touching anything.
I don't think it's here.
I don't think it's here. Okay. So I'm just wondering, how are we going to? Okay, let me be more explicit. So you know how sometimes, and I'm sure you've witnessed that in New York City, where this is something that will support the students, but somehow the parents are not coming alongside it. And so is this, you know what I mean, right? So is this
Like if the parents weren't to consent for the service?
correct?
So in that instance, we would have to work as a school community to support them with the services that we have in school if they consent to that. Like ultimately, the parents have to be in agreement because it's an outpatient service. Even the model is that it's an outpatient service. Oh, you found it. Good job.
Pretty quickly.
That was really distracting. It's an outpatient service in the school. So it's going to operate just like any other mental health clinic would, but we're trying to support the kids in the building because there are barriers for some families to access the supports outside of school. Maybe the parents are working 2 jobs or whatever the case may be. And it's just another opportunity for the kids to get help. That's kind of how I see it.
Okay, got it.
And the priority is children who cannot access it.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily. Everyone can have access to the supports. The clinical team or teachers would work with the Andrews clinician to make a referral, and they would assess the needs level, and then they would determine whether or not it was appropriate and reach out to the families.
Thank you so much for bringing this to
Yeah,
our
of course.
schools.
I'm really excited.
Is this
Yeah.
open to the general students, or this is just special
All
ed?
students have access to it. It's not,
Just for special ed? It's
Correct.
for everyone?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Again, this would be something that opens in the second semester of this year, or is this a next year thing?
we're hoping,
January
we're in like the
2024.
final stages, so we're hoping the state gives us approval for January.
Okay,
Andrus has
gotcha.
already hired the person. They're ready to go. Once the state finalizes the paperwork through the Office of Mental Health, we'll be able to start.
Okay, excellent.
Okay? Thanks,
Excellent.
everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
No,
great evening.
I
Happy
have a
Thanksgiving.
bunch of questions.
Oh,
I'm
actually,
sorry.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I have some general questions and some more specific questions. I'm sorry if you said this at the beginning. I'm not sure, I don't know what Andrus is. I mean, I know Andrus is like in town, but I don't know what the Andrus
Oh,
Mental
okay,
Health Clinic is.
So Andrus is a non-for-profit agency that has been supporting families for, I don't know the exact number, but
Hundreds.
yeah, a very long time, in accessing mental health support. They have a day program, they have a residential program, they have outpatient services, they have therapeutic support, they have crisis intervention, they have access to psychiatrists for families that are in need of psychotropic medication. They are in the community, so they're really excited to access us, you know.
Great.
Okay.
So is this going to be, we have since they're going in the elementary school and the middle school, it's really such a broad range, K through 12. I don't actually know how are they a psychiatrist? Are they
It's a social worker.
a social worker? I don't know if you specialize in grade levels when you're a social
No.
worker?
Not typically,
not
no.
necessarily.
Kids.
So are they do they specialize in certain behaviors? Like, is this do we have someone who specializes in a certain type of behavior or issue? It's just in general?
It's anyone who is in need of psychological support.
Got it.
So in their licensure process, they go through a series of exams and internships that allow them to have experience with all different populations.
Got it. So will the kids who qualify for it, will they get like a regular 1-hour session, for instance, that you would get if you were going outside of the
Yeah,
school?
I'm not sure of like the timeframes of these services, but it would be comparable, yes. Like either 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour.
And then what are the steps to like how they're identifying the children who they feel are in need?
So it would be through a multidisciplinary team of referral, probably similar to the processes we already have in place to support our students, or it could be escalated through a crisis situation. So it kind of is a case-by-case basis, but...
Right. And then the therapeutics probably can't be shared with the teachers or the psychiatrists or social workers in the school, right? Because of like HIPAA regulations?
Right, unless the parents signed a release
Parents
of
can get
records.
permission.
Yeah.
We have a lot of our students that are getting services in school that have outside therapists, and a lot of the parents allow the school's counselor to work with the outside therapist.
Got it.
Really collaborate and be a team, so I would say the same thing.
Right. So I'm just wondering if this is kind of a thing about like, so it's mostly mental health issues.
Correct.
It's not like, okay, it's not like things like executive functioning issues or things like that. It's mostly,
I don't anticipate that will be our target population initially. It could be something that develops throughout the development of the program, but in the beginning stages, we're really targeting students who are having difficulty navigating due to mental health issues.
right. Got it. I was just asking about the hour-long program. I was just wondering if there was like, I was trying to figure out how many people she could help a week. So he or she, if it's like 5 a day times 5 days, if that's like 25 kids, if that's the hope. And then how do the kids graduate from it? Because there might be other kids in need as well. So, therapy can be your whole life.
Right.
So like, what if you have another kid is identified, but the therapist has, is busy with her schedule or his
Right.
schedule with the others, like.
Right, so that's where the fact that they have an outside network that they're directly linked to can be really nice. they're directly linked with Andrus. So if there was an overflow that we weren't able to service in school, they could potentially refer them to a colleague within Andrus and streamline that process. Keep in mind, we're rolling into the pilot phase, so it'll be reassessed, and if there was a need for an additional person or a 0.5 or whatever the case may be, that's something that we would have to discuss with Andrus and the state and see if we qualified for additional support.
Great. Did you say, I'm sorry, is this like a full-time person that's coming to us? Like
Full-time district-wide support,
aids,
yeah.
And we don't pay for it, it's just paid through the insurance program?
Correct.
Great. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks
Have a
so
great
much.
Thanksgiving,
I have one
everyone.
more to that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It just following up.
Hot topic.
I also really want to thank you for all the work that went into this.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I couldn't.
Appreciate it.
The more mental health support for people, the better, said the psychologist on the board. But, you know, and I think those are really good questions, Doreen. I guess I would say two things that really come at me in the starting of this program. One is, to Sylvia's point, I think it's so important, and I'm sure you'll do this, but the coordination with the other people in the school so no one feels like toes are getting stepped on,
Yep.
or someone's whatever job, whatever, that people are working together and not, it would just
100%.
defeat the purpose in some ways.
Yes.
And we know those things can happen easily in any organization. And then the other thing, when you were asking about how often kids would get seen, and you know, when it really comes down to numbers, it's not a lot of time. But I guess I would personally really hope that kids will be seen every week. And if there are a lot of kids who need to be seen, it doesn't mean, okay, then we'll have them be seen every other week.
No, yeah, I think
that is
therapeutically it's really important
worth
to have consistent support. No, I'm in 100% agreement with you.
Okay.
Yep.
My question, and probably you had mentioned it already, is in terms of the initial assessment of someone that is deemed may need it or have the mental health. I know that to be honest, everyone has mental stages in their lives, but somehow there's that kind of stigma connected to mental health, which should not be, because we all get into those phases in different forms. So in terms of the record and all those things, like how is it going to be managed? What number one, what's the initial assessment? Who does it? Who determines it? Who says it? Because is there some kind of professional learning that is going to go around this? Now that is something that is really going to be open to the general education aspect of,
so
it's going to be open to the whole students, not just special ed where we have our own space, but so I'm just wondering, what I'm sure it's in the pilot, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the supervising social worker from Andrus will work with the social worker who is hired to support our team here to develop those protocols, much like they've developed in other school districts where they have school-based mental health clinics that are operational and have been for several years. And that is through a multidisciplinary team. And another way that I anticipate children will be escalated in need of support is if they're in a crisis situation and the family doesn't have access to outside services. So it's going to be great, guys.
It's awesome.
Ladies and
Yeah,
gents.
I didn't want you to think that my detailed questions
no.
meant I didn't like.
No,
I'm
for
really
sure.
happy about it. Very
Yeah.
happy. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't want to cut anyone off. Is that the last question?
That's it. Thanks for all the work on it.
Okay,
Appreciate
have a
it.
good Thanksgiving.
No, it's not a question. Let me just sweep here. This is having a wonderful additional assistant director enables us to get to this type of work. And we had pitched a couple years ago, you as a board agreed, the community agreed, that broadening out our leadership in special ed would have all student, whole student impact and effect. And this is a great example of that. One, we were fortunate to land a veteran expert school psychologist willing to leave the city. And as many of you know, the city is loaded with incredible talent within a massive school district. And even out in my Midwest days, we benefited. So it's not a new thought to me here. So I want to say that without that, in a sense, added freedom, and anyone who's up at Hillside knows Marie Angela is spot on, present all the time, and also looking at the bigger picture. So that flexibility was critical here. It's a pilot, we're going to learn, and you can be assured that Marie-Angela brings incredible rigor to this, led by Laura, that we will make sure all these kinds of questions are answered well. And it is a pilot with grant funding, so it lets us figure out the best way to provide these vital services for our students. Final comment, I don't go to a superintendent's meeting in this region, as you know from my text. I'm at one about every other week, where mental health is not way up the list. Way up the list. And so for us to be doing this work is in it's a modest way, but a really essential way, is really important.
Excellent.
There's a grant fund for it? I'm sorry, I thought insurance paid for it.
It's through reimbursement through insurance. Initially, we thought it was a grant process, but it's not. It's Article 31 funded by Office of Mental Health through New York State.
Right. I mean, I just want to say one more time that I think I've heard from so many people that it's so hard to find a therapist for especially kids now, unfortunately, which is terrible. Everybody's so busy. So I think it's amazing that you're bringing someone to us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Laura.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did we want to, Laura, do we need to have anything on?
I just,
Let me go to the mic.
If there was any questions about this special education district plan. So I think, then if there's no questions, you have to,
I was just, when I looked through it, I was just like, is this a state requirement? Is that
Yes.
why? Okay, that's what I figured.
It's a state requirement. And then I just have to add in that if you approve it, your signature would go on it, and maybe we can correlate, because I didn't put the board meeting, I think I put last board meetings. So if it was approved tonight, then I'll just put it in, and then maybe I can coordinate with Melissa to have you, because the president has to sign it.
Sure, I'm here all week. So.
And then it gets posted. We'll take down the other one, and we'll upload the new one.
Gotcha.
And then I also reduced the number of years rather than doing 5 years. I think I did 3 years just because I felt like 5 years was way too long.
That was my main question. Was there any, I mean, I read through it, but is there any difference I should have noted from before? I'm assuming we had something like this before and we're just updating it. So any difference from before?
The only difference was...
Except for the 5 and 3 years.
Yeah, and then a lot of the, because you have to put all, like, it captures a moment in time of right now. So I used October as our capture, and there in our previous one that was 5 years ago, we had students in different programs, so those programs were removed because we don't have students there. It's just so like little tweaks. It really is more representative of where we are today versus where we were 5 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that was it.
Yeah.
Good?
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So then I guess you'll just,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the business items later in the agenda.
okay,
So-
great.
So it'll save you having to wait.
All right, thank you.
Thank you both for coming.
Have a great Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye.
Moving on to a initial 24-25 budget prep presentation. This is sort of a high-level overview of, the ingredients with which we begin the pie, the cake. Or whatever it might be. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
And I was blaming the other mic over there. This one. Oh, Patrick, are you going to switch the presentation? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, yes, tonight we're really just going to review at a high level an overview of our budget process. Both we're going to go over an internal budget calendar, and which is the one in which we follow to create our budget, and just to go through the steps in how we get to bring all that information together. We'll review the external budget calendar, which is mostly driven with legal timelines about when budgets have to be presented and approved and hearings and all that. And I will also will review, and a lot of this information has been presented before, but of course each year we do have a requirement to discuss in public long-range planning, which is actual requirement. So it also helps us achieve that. And just to kind of remind and speak to like some historical budget numbers, some early indication of some trends we're seeing, and just to kind of start us off as we enter the next few months. So, okay. So again, I just reviewed very quickly the topics we'll be following, going over tonight. And what's nice about all of these presentations, we have a dedicated part of our website, and it just kind of helps people if they're kind of following along with us, how we build off of one presentation to another. So here again, I mentioned earlier, I just updated this chart from last year, and I could obviously go through the different years, but just for purposes here, you can kind of see back, and I dropped off the year prior to this, but there was a time, and this was really prior to the 08-09, the drop in the market that, and even budgets earlier than the 04-05 budget, budgets to budgets at that time were over 8 to 10%, 12%, and you can see the tax rate implication. Now, interestingly enough, during some of these years is when the retirement system payments were at the historic lowest because the stock market at that time was doing so well, and we really didn't even have that much debt. So, I mean, just kind of to demonstrate, I know there are times people think that the majority of the budget growth happened in that kind of prior to the 08-09 year. And really, if you follow after that, you'll see that not only has our district grown in terms of our enrollment, we've also done 2 bonds during that time and have experienced higher than historically higher health insurance premiums as well as retirement systems. So, this is just as a reminder. We always like to evaluate, and, I could highlight, you can kind of see some years in which, as an example, 22, 23, and 23, 24, we had the uptick in the budget to budget really based upon that new debt coming online, right, for the last set of projects we did. And then prior to that, in the 17-18, 18-19 school year, again, the uptick there is due to when the fields were rehabbed and all the facilities work that was done back then. But outside of that, I think we really do try to bring our budget to budget for all of our regular expenses as close to under that 2 to 3% threshold. Not every year, but it's just, I think it just reminds everyone that we do really try to have some restraint in the creation of our budget. Okay. So again, it's very hard to see here, but the board has this also as part of the agenda. This is attached for people in the public as well. And each year, this is provided, and we update this each year, and we post it. And as the budget process, as we get closer to our proposed budget this year, we update it and try to understand not only what we're proposing for next year, but we also it is important for us to understand the impact of those numbers as you go out in a 5-year projection. And part of this is to understand both obviously the growth of numbers. We use this. As we're discussing facilities planning and things such as that, we would start to maybe plug in some numbers if we were to do another bond, and if that were the case, then in which year would that the impact of that hit us, and what does that look like on the total budget growth and on tax rates. So again, you'll see in the first column, we have our adopted budget, which is our current operating budget for 23-24, $57 million, $57,609. And the next column there, what we do, and we'll be updating this throughout each month now moving forward, we start estimating where we see our expenses. Where are we? Where do we think we'll be at the end of this fiscal year? How are we operating? Sorry. In looking at our original budget and what is actually happening, right? And then as we create our budget, of course, we don't start at our prior year budget. We look at how we're currently operating, where we're trending, and that's really we do really zero-based budgeting, but obviously we see, we make adjustments when we see how certain expenses either go up or go down, and that really helps us understand, our projected growth for the 5 years after that. So again, these budget numbers are not, are simply taking where we're estimating the end of this year to be trending towards, looking at what our, in salaries, there's different high, medium, low. And what that really represents is we know at the lowest number, that our expenses are going to grow by a certain budget growth each year. And that really is representing what we know our contracted raises are, looking at a potential number of retirees, a potential number of new hires, understanding the step schedule and trying to make some predictions off of this. This is not, we have not yet, actually done our actual numbers, but looking at where we currently are with our payrolls, looking at the potential people we believe will be either dropping off and the replacement cost of those individuals, and looking at salary growth over year, there's at the best case scenario, which is the low scenario, is if you have a lot of retirements, you're able to replace them with relatively much less expensive folks, and you don't have a year in which you have a lot of leave replacements and things like that. And that would put us at that low projection number, kind of everything working in our favor. The middle range is where I say is typically where we land. And if you look at these projections that we've done previously and look at where our budgets have ended up, that number is as close to where we end up ending up most years. Because that also in the middle allows for some of that variation of, different things that could happen, needing an additional person, more leave replacements, or more staff needed and things of that nature. And then, of course, high allows for a little bit more flexibility. Although there's not a lot of change between the numbers, you'll see between, just to give you, for some who are not familiar with looking at this, between the high and the medium on salary ranges, you'll see there's about a $300,000 differential, which is not a lot for us, not on $32 million worth of salaries, right? So, but you can kind of see, although they're different buckets, they are relatively tight. Years ago, there was definitely a lot more wiggle in between the categories, but what we're finding is we're not seeing those extremes in our budgeting. So that's why you'll kind of see three different scenarios, and that's really just on the salaries and benefits, because all of the other expenses, short of special education, are a bit more predictable in terms of looking at facilities growth, because these things are more fixed costs rather, like facilities, there's, unless you're building, and when we expand, we know we have to increase some of the facilities costs, but most of these, we're able to use a CPI type calculation to project our expenses. But it's obviously salary and benefits, because that's the majority of our budget. That's the majority of places where we're going to get some budget variation in those numbers, because it's all driven on student needs and individuals. So, but just looking at just putting in some very early, I want to keep repeating early numbers and some projections, you'll see already that at the high level, in a rollover budget, but again, we're projecting somewhere, I would say, in the 3%, increase of expenses. Now, if just of one number to note is the last line, which is the interfund transfer. If you remember last year, we had a larger than typical budget transfer in that, and that was to help fund the special education renovation. So that number alone, we had about a $350,000. We're predicting, if not more, savings, that because we don't anticipate making that level of transfer anymore. But again, these are some very early numbers, and as an example, in the next week or so, I think we need to hire another E&L teacher, which was a result of just having some new students move in the district this last week. So already, like just from me working on this, we found out we're hiring another 0.6. So then again, that will be put back in and projected out. So that's just, again, an example of how things will be subject to change. And of course, then our actual budget is based on actual people that we know of, and that we factor in retirements and all the rest as we gain more of that information. But, right now, but this again does not represent anything additional. Like if we were to add a program, a Schedule B, or any, expenses go up, this is actually a relatively conservative, not conservative, like more like things could very easily be more expensive, that I try to keep it as tight as possible, because as you can see, even with a relatively small 2 or 3% increase, it is $2 million or so, or at times so our budgets grow pretty quickly even with a relatively small growth factor. And again, as you look at that, As that plays out over the next few years, you can see how, quickly with a budget growth at that median growth factor, by 26, 27, we could be at almost a $64 million spending plan. And that's not, again, these numbers do not include increases in staffing and, increases in programs. So it's, the numbers do grow pretty quickly and pretty easily.
Can I just ask you two
Sure, of
questions?
course.
Just basic questions. Remind me what per pupil allocation is again?
So per pupil allocation is for supply, software,
Got
and
it. Yeah, I
equipment for
remember.
children.
Yeah, perfect. And then is Schedule B, does that come into salaries
Yes,
or in other?
Some of it is in salaries, so the actual stipends are in salaries and all the other expenses. We have a lot of contractual, it's a lot of contractual expenses, but for theater, as an example, or Schedule Bs, that would be for sports, it would be referees, which is about $90,000 a year just for that.
So that falls into other?
That's an all other, yeah.
Got it.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. And I believe that also includes like our security costs, because that's a contractual service. It does, okay. Just want to make sure.
Security is under other.
It is under other, and that's about $450,000 a year. So just, demonstrates how expensive everything is.
Wow.
Okay. Again, just a reminder, I just kind of covered all of these things. So these are the major drivers, of course, enrollment, class size, and, this really does not change much. It's the same kind of drivers each year. Again, just other than the last 5 years or so, we are seeing a large payments for both health insurance benefits that are much higher than they were historically, as well as pension costs are significantly higher.
Maureen, can I just pause there for
Sure,
one
of course.
So can you just sort of put a number or character to what that has looked like, the increases?
Yes, so the pension costs in New York State have definitely run the gamut, but as I had mentioned earlier when I spoke about those earlier budgets in the early 2000s, there was a time that our contribution, the district's contribution is we pay a percent of total salaries, to the state to fund our obligation, the pension liability. Early and it's driven mostly on the performance of the stock market for the most part, because it's based on how well their investments have done, but it's based on a 5-year average. So just to give you that background, it's not based on one single year. It takes a while of very well-performing stock markets to, get that rate back down a bit. And it's also based upon, obviously how long people live and all the rest, right? Years ago, in the early 2000s, it was less than 1%. Wow. There was a time it was 0.3%. That's it. Now we're at like 11%. So, as I mentioned, that's why I always look at those things. And there's times, I know when I first worked here, I wasn't responsible for making the budget, but I will tell you that even at that time, our budgets were huge. And interestingly enough, they didn't even have those other kind of drivers. It was just, I'm not quite sure what it was going to, but there was a lot of money being spent back then. But again, we're also in this new tax cap world, but the pension costs are now at least at 9 to 11%. It's at least we can kind of manage that. They were going up. They kind of seem to be flattening out a bit. The TRS, which is the Teachers Retirement System, they did project it's going to increase next year again, but not by maybe 1% or so. But there were times where that in the last 5 years that it went up 2 and 3% in 1 year, which is a huge hit. You charge like hundreds of thousands of dollars just for that increase alone. So yeah.
And then the same sort of look on the health insurance. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the health insurance last year was 8% increase in actual costs to the district, and and they were able to keep it lower because they used a lot. Well, the last 2 years they like ourselves has what's called fund balance or reserves, and they what was reported to us by the the board of that, the health insurance, they were using quite a bit or some of their reserves to keep it actually lower. So had they not used reserves, we would have been looking at a double-digit increase in our health insurance. And as a reminder, more than maybe not half, but close to half of our health insurance is just for retirees. So, people do live a long time. It becomes a secondary insurance to people once they become Medicare eligible as their primary. But I believe I think currently there's at least 150 or more retirees currently on our plan, in addition to like close to 250 to 300, current employees. So as we know that this year we're going to be close to 7 million, we're paying. So, and so at, even 5% of 7 million is a big number. It's a big, especially when your tax cap is usually putting under $1 million of growth. So these are the challenges that we have. So that's where, as you look in previous years, typically we have made, we're kind of at the end of finding any more economies. I think we have tried and we have, we've done that, and it's sometimes it's a lot of time to discuss it, but there have been many things over the years that we've helped us get a little bit more efficient. So I think right now we're rubbing up against, there's not many of those things left. And, hopefully the health insurance, like myself, all of my colleagues and I are waiting for that number to come out. We're hoping, we're hoping that it'll be like less than 5%, because of the last year. But again, there's some indications. I think after COVID, which we were told, there was a lot, as we all kind of know, there was some medical billing, but a lot of people weren't going to doctors and getting procedures. So I think, the way the expenses, what they were projecting to spend, they've been spending a lot more the last, and we're self-insured with another 25 districts, so it's based upon performance, right? It's not like a private insurance company it's really, driven on actual expenditures, so.
I know it's not in here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is this in any particular order?
Oh, no, this is just, no, I mean, no, it is not.
It's just a list.
It's just a list, it's just a list.
Which one is more expensive? Okay, that's
Yeah.
my first. I think I keep asking this question every year.
No, it's a good question. I would just kind of put down with things.
Okay, and then I'm trying to figure out the out-of-district tuition as
Yes.
a major expense.
Yes.
And then when you say complexity of student needs, which I'm assuming is outside of special education, can you throw a little bit light into what that actually means?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we try to demonstrate here is that although we talk a lot about enrollments and class size, but we also, saying that is that, I think very usually a lot of what she spoke about tonight, right? So there's, in even the last 15 years, the amount of clinicians the district has now has changed. And some of them are to support our special education students, but many of them, social workers, guidance counselors, are also there to support. As an example, about 5 years or so ago, we added a guidance counselor to Hillside, and that was a new role there. You could have even children with non-IEPs, but that either need OT, PT, or other type of services. So really, or our HAS program, I mean, I'm not saying, it could be a number of things that this speaks to, or a tech school, any things like that would, E&L students possibly.
Humans are complex, and we've been complex for thousands and millions of years, but there's an increasing trend of demanding the schools to do more and more to address that complexity.
Right. And
in places like Hastings, which are a high service type of district and high service orientation and culture, that's supposed to be for all students.
Okay.
Some
So
of
it's
it would
like
be
a
overlapping into the sped, some
Yes,
not.
yeah.
But differentiated instruction,
Okay.
that whole range, making sure that your student needs are met athletically, artistically, emotionally, and all the rest. That's a big bundle I just threw at you, right? It's recognize those needs and meeting those. So if you ignore the complexity, you run a lot less expensive district, and then you have a lot of unhappy, unserved people. So I think what's emerging here is, if you did a graph, you have a whole bunch of trend lines going like this, right? But the revenue line is like this, right? But historically, about 9 years ago, the revenue line was smacking right up with it. When you see that 11, 10%, and when we have quite a veteran staff here, that's the other part of the orientation. This is a different district to run now financially than it was 12 years ago. And if your average level of run in the district is some 20 years, you begin to see a lot of the natural churn and questioning that you may get in managing the district. So.
Thank you. The other question that I had, which I know is on the minds of others, because I mean, I see this is a reasonable place that we are getting ourselves, but a lot of people are aware that there's going to be the comparison and all. I mean, we always do that every year.
Of course.
And we know times are different and all of that. So just as a follow-up, and it was actually something I was going to ask, not today, but I think I'll just bring it up, that there's always a conversation about we've not had increases, and then there's a conversation of those who say we had increases. So in navigating all of these, what were some of the things that were key to bringing about the consistent move, and now looking like we are not moving the revenue alongside what we are needing? In other words, what is happening now that did not happen the time that things were what they were?
Sure.
And what happened those times that we had the...
Well, I think there were two things. I think that one of the things that, the tax cap is why years ago there was no tax cap. So if you needed a 10% tax rate increase, it was a 10%. That was really that's really the major driver. So I think what Bill was demonstrating was that although you can override a tax cap, it's not easy to do, and people don't, I mean, there's a time and place for it, but because we've had to comply with the tax cap, which limits the amount we can raise our taxes, that's fine, but when you still have some push on some things that are out of our control, like expenses, that it starts now to become, more difficult to close that gap. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. I think I'm actually not against the tax cap per se, because I think as I look back, it started helping districts to be more mindful. And obviously we were able to be tax cap compliant for a long time, as were a lot of districts. So it does demonstrate there was a time, the chart shows, that there was a lot of spending going on, and it's not necessarily, we interestingly enough were able to bring it back in and find a way to, align some of our expenses closer to what we were allowed to levy. But I think that's the main difference of the revenues and expenses, is because the tax cap kind of keeps you level, and when you have these expenses that are going up or trending higher than they were historically, it makes it more difficult. So that's why I think the demonstration was seeing that. Now we're seeing that kind of gap that's forming.
More students now.
Oh, we do, definitely, yes.
Because that's what, if you
Yes.
have more students, then there's more costs.
Yes.
I think but anyway, that was actually for another day, not today.
But fortunately, sorry, go ahead. No, I was going to say, fortunately, and we'll see that on an upcoming graphic, the last 2 years prior to this, we were seeing that increase in foundation aid. And we'll speak a little bit about our state aid, which actually was one of the things, because of COVID and federal monies, we started to see a lot of money from, but we're not convinced that that's going to be here with us forever. But I do think that the last couple years has been very, prior to this year, that's been helpful for us.
My last question, which I should have waited for you to answer, was
Okay.
I'm not sure how out of district tuition is an expense to us. Maybe.
Well, that's for students. That's for students we place out of district, and
we place out of district.
yes.
Okay, I'm like,
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, we are supposed to be getting tuition.
We pay them to come.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
got it, okay.
Yes, that's just for children that we send to other programs.
I have a quick question, Maureen.
Sure.
I know that you don't have enrollment in class size in this document. I'm sure you're going to show us like the 5-year trend or
Yes.
whatever in some other one. Just curious, from what you've seen, is it fairly flat to this year, next year?
So currently, in looking at, we have sent out our internal budget packet. So in that, we include for the each building their projected enrollment numbers. And what we do use, obviously, is we look at, we do have a program that helps us project that. And basically it looks at 5 years, and we have certain grade levels in which we historically there'll be an increase of students year over year, and it helps kind of blow out what that looks like. All that being said, it seems as though there's about, I would say, a steady enrollment, about a 2% or so increase year over year. Each building is growing, just a bit. I think the high school may be maintaining, is relatively flat. Middle school is going up a bit, and as is Hillside. So we're continuing to see that, because I think the current 8th grade is that large cohort, right? And they're going into the 9th, but the current 12th grade is relatively big too. So the middle school is, when I say flat, maybe flat or down like 5 or 6 students, but pretty much maintaining the same amount of sections as they currently have. So I will, but to your
We'll have
earlier
that,
point,
'cause
we'll
you
have it.
mentioned
Yeah.
the high school uptick in
One of the
ninth
things
grade.
I do want to mention,
incoming.
yes, and again, you would have more of a pulse on it than I would, but I was speaking to someone who is on one of the village boards, and I guess the thing with the accessory apartments or something with
Exactly.
local is still
It's coming back.
It's still coming back,
Right.
and we were just discussing a number of things, and they brought that up to me, and they said, I heard you're discussing a bond, and I think you really are, meaning for space, because they keep their person who's, I don't want to say who it is, but person who's connected in the village, and said that is very smart, and you should really, if you can, either make sure that you're paying attention to that at the school level with the discussions that are happening, and then, when they discuss it, if and when they discuss it at village meetings, because it will definitely have an impact here
I think
in
even
terms
if,
of enrollment.
yeah, I mean, even with the bond, if they pass that, it's a disaster for us.
Yeah.
In terms of space, we'll never recuperate. We'll have
Right.
like 40-person classes. It'll be terrible.
Right. So I knew that was a discussion last year, and that wasn't even something, as we look at our plan, we weren't even necessarily factoring, we weren't sure we know there'd be some additional growth in the future here, but we weren't exactly, paying attention to that. But, yes, so right now our enrollment is steady. We're continuing, we're still enrolling children. We still have kids coming in. I mentioned we had some new students, some of which, as I mentioned, we'll need an ENL teacher for, and, or ELL now, sorry, ELL. ENL, okay, ELL students. We're constantly, we typically are just still seeing students come in each year at different grade levels. So, yeah, so we are projecting for a slight increase, and as we know from the past, the thing that's tricky for us, sometimes those 5 or 7 students at any grade level can tip the balance, and where we're breaking sections, well, maybe not 5, but 7 to 10, it has sometimes puts us in a place in which we have to increase staffing. Okay, so again, similar to the expenditure 5-year revenue, this is then looking at if we have our current revenues or estimated end-of-year revenues, and then we project out the 5-year revenue projections off of that. And this is important because as we look at what Bill had mentioned, how then that the revenue is relatively flat, and we see the escalation of our expenses, you can quickly see, and on the bottom of this chart, you'll see what, under the title total revenue, you'll start seeing what is called revenue shortfalls. And what this is doing is it's looking at the projection of expenses, and then it's, looking at, well, will you have enough revenues with the tax cap formula? And then what, if you're using that 2% growth on the tax cap and kind of, putting modest increases across the other revenue categories, when do you start seeing where you are now, either your expenses are outpacing your revenues? And you can see, even as we just look at 24-25, that, as I had mentioned earlier, if we end up, or if our budget without any increases, and that's very early, because I don't know if there will be any requests for increases, which my guess is yes, there will be. But even with just a rollover budget, currently we could potentially have about 100,000 or so shortfall, just with if we don't, if other, if things are coming in relatively the same as they did this year. So as you look at the out years, and you can see how with that tax cap, that limitation of the increase in the property taxes, starts to kind of make it where then you'll start seeing the expenses outpacing those revenues. So again, this is something we're very mindful of. This is something as we think about increases of expenses that we have to be mindful of. Like, okay, we want to increase it, then we want to make sure that if we increase something, we're looking at whether we could sustain it, right? We don't want to add things and then come back to you 2 years later and be like, we have to cut everything. So that's not. So occasionally we can afford something for a year or two, but we're not sure if we can, keep it long term. So as we go through our budget process, we always are reflecting back on this, and of course, districts can go for what is called a budget override, and then you can increase your taxes above that 2% threshold if, people felt that was the right thing for the district. But what we do in this 5-year projection is we're assuming in this that we are trying to maintain the tax cap levy.
Maureen, I'm sorry for not understanding. So when I look at the revenue shortfall high, that means there's a chance that we could be almost $600,000 difference between the budget and the revenue, versus the revenue shortfall low is a negative number. That means we might come up,
under, correct.
So we might have that. But what's super concerning, now that I understand that, is that the revenue shortfall high suddenly goes into the millions. And when you look at 2027 to 28, it's a potential, is that an 8 or a 6? Sorry, I can't tell.
That's a 6.
Yeah.
Is this something concerning that we should be thinking about, or because we can't have a shortfall, so that means we have to go to raising taxes, which nobody wants.
Right.
I'm just wondering.
Actually, why don't you re-explain it, because I think,
No, that's.
So meaning we would be short, let's just stay in next year, we'd be short over
If our budget came out the highest, if every expense number was higher, at the highest level, which we don't, like I said, typically, historically, we're in that middle range, middle to low, but I think it
even
helps
in the middle range, we still have a shortfall.
Right, but I think that's something, again, this is very, there's ways in which we can tighten up. Yeah, and we could use some, I'm showing here that we would be moving in some money out of reserves and, all that. And again, there could be, we may get a little bit more money in different revenue categories. We may, have a few more retirements or other things in which we're able to,
Right. But that's that's piddly amounts. That could help us be flat to the previous year. But when I look at the projection and I see millions of dollars, even the revenue shortfall low in 2027 is almost $1 million.
And I think a key there would be, the past doesn't predict the future, but you could go back 3 or 4 years and see what the run rate's been.
Well, the reason I want to highlight what's really driving some of that. So as Alex said, we do have reserves, but reserves, unless you replenish them, run out.
Right.
So you can see where we're,
deplete our reserves
right, so
quickly
the
if we used it for
reason
that.
that you'll see in those out years, that number becoming larger is because the assumption is, as we have tighter budgets, there's less money to put in reserves, and there's less money then to offset. So, the one thing we have been lessening the amount of reserves we're using, because then if you use like as an example, next year, we'll use $1 million, but then the next year you're just making a larger hole to fill. Yeah. So, part of why, if you look at 26, 27 as an example, we're lessening, our a few $100,000 there on a potential reserve. And then, of course, with those numbers are just becoming larger on the other side. Now, that being said, one thing that this formula for the tax cap in this very simple formula, I'm using 2%. Today, as an example, and I was going to report this out on my board comments. Each year, one of the calculations you do to determine your tax rate growth is part of it is that 2% CPI number or 2% or less, and another is unique to the district. And I've spoken about it, and it's part of what we present. It's the individual district growth factor, which is provided to us by ORPS, Office of Real Property Services. That number did come out today. That's giving us another it's a little less than 1.1% growth on our levy. So right now, this number that I have in here is just a flat 2%. We already know we're able to levy 3% next year and be taxed. Now, people's taxes would still have to go up 3%. I mean, just as a reminder, we levied less than we were allowed to last year by 1 We could have levied 4% last year, but we only levied less than 3. And that part of that, and that's okay. I'm not saying you always have to levy to the max. I mean, one of the things you're allowed to add back to your levies when you have new debt coming on, we were allowed to do an exclusion and then add that number back. And that's where you start getting the rub, because that's why the state allows for that to be added. But I think there was a concern of the overall growth, so we did keep it below the allowable levy. But right now, as an example, that our allowable levy is going to be, we're able to levy another about $400,000 or with that 1%. So, I mean, this is, again, an important chart or an important exercise to do, because I think at times in thinking about when we talk about levies and we think about, well, should we keep it below the allowable levy, you can kind of see why it is dangerous when you go too low or you want to stay under that allowable levy. Like as an example, this year it's 3.1%, and sometimes even I'm guilty of, you say, oh, let's do like 2, maybe we want to be a little bit less than 3. I'm just saying this. And then you can see, though, by doing that, then like a year or two later, you can end up with these significant shortfalls. Yeah, it kind of compounds it. That's why I think it's important for us to look at this chart, and again, I'll adjust it to know, now that we have that growth factor, this presentation was already done, so I sent it out, so I didn't want to change it. But as an example, seeing now that flow through, right? So we know that's another 500,000. So then if I were to put that number in here, now suddenly we have no shortfalls or a very little one at the high level. And then that'll also, compounds out in the future years.
Right.
So just even that one little change of that 1% for next year will eliminate any shortfall. And then it will also make those shortfalls in future years less significant. And then we also can anticipate we would have more fund balance.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yes.
Maureen, so back to what Dr. Makesi said, if we could go back, because I know that I get the shortfall piece, but
Yes.
I know that sometimes almost at the end of the year, we don't use all the money. Like there's money left over because thank God we are spending within our means.
Yes.
Right? So I know these are projections, but is there a way that, it's good to make projections and not assume that you have and you don't have, and then now you're in trouble.
Right.
But can we realistically say over the years, if these kind of shortfalls have been not as close as, because we've tried to not spend outside of our means, if I would just bring it to normal everyday budgeting at home, right?
Like, so fund balance.
You get what I'm saying,
yes,
right?
I do.
And I know the fund balance cannot be touched. There are specific things for specific. We have to have a specific 4%, blah blah blah. But
right.
I'm just wondering if.
So I think when we do projections, I think our budget and fund balance comes from two places. It's when you have some expenditure savings, and if also your revenues come in over projections, right? But as I had mentioned, we have been fortunate. Most districts, I think there's, again, saying these numbers on what our auditor demonstrated, we really only were close to we only had 1% or whatever it was, a little bit over 1% left of expenditure savings. And although it is like $1 million, but when you look at it as a total, a percentage of a budget it's relatively, or whatever, even 2%, a relatively small number. But I think, again, there's two things to demonstrate here. I think as we look, and this is as we consider and as we consider internally what we bring to the board, and we look at the abilities to afford, sustain, increases, what our current understanding is of expenses. So, we do try to be conservative as we can. But then also, I think on what I was mentioning with the revenue, I think that's where as we think about the tax cap and the levy and all the rest, and we'll be having those conversations once we present a budget, we do want, it is important to see where even a slight percentage in that levy, in sometimes tightening yourself up in the short term can leave gaps in the long term. I think that's what I'm, for the most part, trying to demonstrate with this slide. And I think it's helpful as we look at when our proposed budget, when we do present it to you, and and again, I'll be updating, as I had mentioned earlier, I will continue to update this 5-year plan on the expenditures, because as the further along we get in the year, the better understanding we have of where we'll end up on both the revenues and expenditures. This is a good time of the year. I think we have a good sense of how we're doing thus far. So that's why I did present a column in both of these projections to kind of show you where we believe we'll end up on the revenue side and the expenditure side. And that helps us also as we develop our next year's budget, right? So we have our actuals. We know, okay, this one we may have thought was going to be higher or lower, and whatever the case may be, and that also helps us build our next year's budget. But again, it is, as Doreen highlighted, sometimes when I look at these numbers, I'll check the formulas. Wait, is that right? Because that seems like a big gap, and you can see how quickly you can get those gaps, as Bill said, because of that relatively tight, flat number in your tax cap. And I think as I'll go to the next slide.
Can I just ask one quick question before you go to the next slide?
Yes.
So in the line for property, if I think it's passed, we're just waiting for it to start, that I wanted to say movie theater, but it's not a movie theater.
Oh, that's not even in here.
No,
yeah,
not even close.
the production.
That's Electric Owl, maybe, if it happens. I mean, it's gigantic for Hastings.
Yeah, because that would add to our property tax.
It's a couple of years down the road.
Oh, it is?
Well, it's a couple of years down the road, and it'll be helpful, but it will not be.
Right, the movie production, I meant, not
Correct.
movie production studio or film production.
I don't want to begin to, so to
Yes.
speak, wager what the value add
Right.
financially would be. It will be helpful, but we will still have to be very smart and frugal.
Right, and so that's like 3 years down, 2 to 3 years down the line, maybe.
But I would encourage all of those in Hastings to embrace it. It's a wonderful
Fully
opportunity.
embraced, it's fully
Very
embraced.
savvy.
It is fully embraced.
All they have to do is look at the revenue shortfall high, and everyone should embrace that.
I believe on what, again, I just throwing out a number, but don't hold me to it, but based upon my understanding of what the value of that property is, that I think it could be like, it's a couple $1 million a
$2
year.
million, yeah.
property
I don't want to
tax.
count my chickens, I was just making
No,
sure.
I know, but I mean, that's why it is, and I understand why they have to do their due diligence and ensure that it's going to work there and all the rest, but I've never, since I've been here, that's pretty amazing that would even be a possibility in terms of it's almost like the best case scenario without bringing like housing and things of that, which are, I'm sure, to the credit of the village, I know that there's probably been a lot of things proposed to them over the years that would have, put a real strain on us. So we thank them for,
No, it's perfect.
trying to work.
Sorry, didn't mean to
You were
interrupt.
going to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Yes, I will go to the next slide. Okay, so again, we've shown this slide in previous years, and again, it's just for some historical context of on state aid. And state aid, it is a big part of our budget because outside of our local property taxes, it's the next largest revenue source for the district, as it is for, in some cases, it's the biggest revenue source for districts, especially in upstate New York, where about 70 to 80% of their schools are funded by the state. And you can see in our case, that's not the case. It's about, I think, maybe it's up to about, no, it's like, it's higher. It used to only be 10% for years, and now it's about 15 or so. But downstate where we are, especially in Westchester County, we really rely heavily on our taxpayers. It's really only been in the last 2 years, 3 years actually, from 21, 22, and you can kind of see just the increases on the bottom that we received, and that has made a world of difference for us, especially last year. I mean, we had a 22% increase in our state aid. Now, some of that, a good portion of that is building aid too. It's not purely foundation aid. So, some of it is some state aid is driven on what we call expense-driven aid, and in our case, some of the increase we received the last few years is money coming back to us from money we've spent on capital and special education expenses and different things that drive aid back to the district. But the majority of increase in the last few years, which has been very different, is the full funding of the foundation aid, which Governor Hochul had promised, and she, in the last 2 years, they have made good on that promise. So basically, the state has been underfunding Hastings for a number of years, and the last 2 years, we've seen that funding actually come through, and you can see that large increase that we received in our state aid, $1.4 million. I mean, that's huge. That's a huge increase for us. I think the concern, and myself and all my colleagues share it, is that the state did receive a tremendous amount of money from the federal government the last few years with the COVID funding and all the rest. And similar to Hastings, which we also received COVID funding, there's this concern about as that money's not available to them, will the state be able to make the financial commitment that they have?
Right, and the comptroller's outlook letter was not great.
Yeah, it wasn't as great. I mean, I think that there have been, as we know, like Wall Street. So New York is different than other states too, because although the COVID money was important, right, like the performance of Wall Street is more important for New York State residents at least, right, because that's what really drives our economy here. So I think as much as you're right, I think the controller is kind of how I am. I guess we're always a little bit negative on things, but I think he's always, of course, very conservative, and he wants to, write his report thus far is, I think there's a concern about the state's ability to continue to fund not only education, but all things at the same rate that they have the last few years. So again, that's why we want to always be very conservative and understand that, that money, there's times in which they've either had to reduce the amount of funding that they've, provided to us, or it's flat. So we don't want to become overly reliant or put all of our, hoping that they'll always be able to fully fund us. So we do keep our eye at that number. But that was
when do you have the projection for the state?
January
for the coming
15th.
January 15th.
Mm-hmm.
What do they use to determine when? Is it ad hoc, it seems?
Oh.
I mean, like, what are they using to determine when they will find out how much they...
Well, no, there's a formula there's a state funding formula. There's different parts of the state aid we receive, and you can see here where there's different categories in which we receive aid, and there's the largest bucket of money that is part of the education formula is called foundation aid, which is like basic aid formula to schools, and that outside of expense-driven aid, which also generates monies to the district, there's a formula in which they use, which is mostly based upon two factors, property wealth in the district and income levels. Westchester County, Long Island, really the lower Hudson Valley, I guess even Putnam actually, and even Dutchess these days, because there's high property wealth in this part of the state, the more property wealth, the less money you get, right? Because the idea of the state aid, which makes sense, is that money is driven, as I mentioned, I think Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, or definitely Rochester and Buffalo, I believe 90% of their school budget, their school budgets are, I don't even know, $1 billion, $800 million, 90% of it is paid for by the state aid, 90%. Like, it's very little.
The reason why I was a little bit aware of it, that the income and the operating, but it looks so sporadic. Like, I'm seeing 10%, 14, 1%, 1%.
Yes, so the last 2 years, there was a change in the way schools were funded. So the formula itself did change, but the money was not received because the formula was changed based upon a lawsuit that New York City had filed against the New York State Department of Education in regards to their formula of how they determined how much money goes to school districts. They won. it changed the formula. Probably for some, it wasn't a good change. For others, like ourselves, it was a good change. Unfortunately, the state never had the money to make good on that funding.
Yeah, it was like an IOU that they never
It was an
paid.
IOU. So if you look at what our formula, you're like, oh, this is great. And then what they say, okay, what you getting this? So that, and there's an IOU but they never pay you back what they owe you. It's just, yeah, so. But like as I said, Hochul, and, my understanding is it was mostly driven on the fact that the state had additional, of course, if they don't have the money, they can't pay anybody else. So they had more money based upon the money they had received from the federal government. Again, I won't go through this, but is just, again, a snapshot if anyone had any questions. So other than state aid and property taxes, we have a few other sources of income, across some small, but it all matters. And one of the things I will highlight here, which has been very good for us the last few years, in particular the sales tax. So we receive a portion. This is not sales tax generated in Hastings. They don't, but we are entitled to a portion. The county sales tax is collected and then redistributed. With the increase of the, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, the local Yonkers has always been high, but everywhere else in Westchester went up I think it was 1% change in the sales tax. And between that and actually very strong sales tax revenue in the county, that number only about 4 or 5 years ago was half. So, I mean, it went from about 400,000 to 800. So that's been a positive increase in revenue for us, because again, it does that, funds two positions. So, anything like that was a welcome increase for us. As there's not a lot of other income that we receive or that we can receive. And again, we spoke a little bit, Alex, and we'll be speaking about it as we get into our budget discussions, the use of, and again, we do want to use some of our reserves because they are set up to help us when, as an example, the retirement reserve, the sole purpose for its existence is when we have these higher contribution levels in certain years. We do want to use some of that money to offset that, to help smooth our increases over the course of long term. And again, as I mentioned, with the good performance of the pretty steady performance of the stock market, we're hoping that eventually that rate starts to just soften a bit on those retirement contributions.
I feel like we did hit these topics already, just if we could maybe go to the calendar part.
Yep.
Before you jump away from the revenue, I'm not sure whether this is possible because it's a public school, but is there any attempt to look into alumni endowments that could be like other college schools have, like Harvard and other places? Like, have we ever thought, or it's a public school, so that is not?
No, I mean, I think there are opportunities. Like, there's always opportunities for people to give us money. I mean, so I mean, there's in different organizations such as that. I mean, as an example, I don't know if it's currently happening, and I won't mention which district it is, but there are some other very wealthy Westchester districts that I know they have, alumni associations who have paid for like full renovation, like have given them money for like capital projects in the millions of dollars. I think, yes, that wouldn't be, the school district couldn't go out and solicit that, right? It would have to be similar to HEF and these other organizations. They would then have to be able to generate those, because they have the they have the ability to provide tax incentives for people to do so, right? Because they're 503C, yeah. I know in other communities, not that I hear about it often, because even in very wealthy communities, I think people feel they're already paying for what the school should be providing.
I think alumni.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Maureen, you may want to speak a wee bit here, because we do get the question about grant funding. Can we carry portions of expense on grants? And you can do the math. I've been in this business since 1981, all education. It's marginal money. And in the public sector, it's even increasingly marginal money, meaning it tends to be soft money, it tends to be money that you can't sustain with, you tend not to put grant money into operating expenses, even the public grant dollars. And so while the mental health piece is wonderful, that's grant funded if that were to go away. So I think most districts of this size don't staff up to try and get alumni money, grant money, and all the rest, because the return on that effort is pretty de minimis. The structures for it on the alumni side, the private money side, would be through things like HEF. And I think those
Or the
sister brother
boosters, yeah.
districts, if you will, that Maureen's referring to, have quite an apparatus. So if you read, for example, hats off to Bronxville, if you read my notes carefully, you saw that their foundation's giving about $500,000 a year. They have an incredible, HEF is
so
wonderful.
you
It's a
noticed
big
that.
fat compliment to HEF. So, and also, they just have generated an incredible apparatus of money raisers, because you got to spend money to get money. So I would just, and maybe you can add to the answer, but simply put, finding grant money to minimize our costs isn't a great chase, except around the edges, such as you saw tonight.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, I mean, like, as you said, I mean, there's obviously people, alumni and all that, and they have an alumni association, and they've never come to us to give, I don't think has that type of, endowment at all, is my understanding. But in terms of even just general grant funding, some districts, and it's really just the larger districts, have full-time people who do write grants for them. I mean, that's, because grants are they don't make it easy, like even money that actually we're allotted, they're like, this is your money, Melissa could tell you this, all you have to do is, they make you write like a book to get it. It's like, okay, but this money's allotted to us, and it could be literally $10,000. No matter if it's under certain grant funding statutes, whether it's 10,000 or 10 million, the same requirements are necessary to get it. Now, we do get whatever's offered to us, and even to get that, it's difficult. So I think, to Bill's, not to say we do not attempt to do so, but that's, especially small districts like our own, like, there could be things out there, but you would need an individual to be working on that, or at least a shared person. And I think the larger districts that actually even have have more opportunities because of their financial, like, because they have their district has 50% or more free and reduced lunch and all the different things that help, which it does make sense. I mean, I don't think there may be there's not typically a lot of state money grants for wealthy districts. I mean, it just is not, which makes sense, right? They want to drive that money to the schools that are a higher need. So, and the external partners, I think, I think we have some of those, but I think it's hard to raise like those type of big dollars. But we're happy. But all the money we do get, we're very happy to receive it.
Thank you.
So again, internal budget calendar. This just kind of runs in parallel to the budget calendar that the board adopted. It kind of gives you a sense of our internal process and what is currently happening, and you can see the timelines, and the turnaround times are pretty quick. I'm sure everyone is not, especially when you're sending things out like right before the holidays, people love you. But there's there, of course, as we all do, we're constantly thinking, and although this is a particular dates that I listed here, it's really a 12-month process, right? You're not even done with one budget, and you're thinking about the next cycle and the next cycle of needs, and, things in which sometimes we know are coming down the pike. So it is something, this is just the formalized time frame. And you can see the dates and when people need to get things to us so that we can start putting it together, so we can understand things holistically, and then start making some, priorities, internal priorities with each other. And again, this is the budget calendar I kind of removed some of the dates that were more like not all the necessary legal dates here, just really trying to hit at a high note. These are the first real full budget that you will start to see, or the full spending plan. The overview of that will be February 6th. Prior to that, we'll be coming back with some other smaller presentations. We'll give you some enrollment data and some things like that. We'll kind of follow the same format we did last year. We hope in January to give you some high-level numbers of where we're seeing things coming in at, prior to showing you the actual details behind that. So similar to what we did last year, we did bring in some numbers to the board around January, and we're planning on doing so because, as I mentioned earlier, we start getting our state aid numbers in January. Not the final state aid numbers, but this is helpful to us to understand and and bring you at least some preliminary numbers prior to the February 6th meeting. The board will have a couple of their each between February 6th and the time you adopt that budget on April 16th. We'll have some formal presentations, and there'll be many opportunities at every board meeting to come back with additional information you may have. You may want to consider doing a work session, like I think we did that last year. I can't remember. I think we may have had one. So that means that you'll just either have a quick start of a business meeting and then, have a good amount of time so the board can have as much time as you need to discuss it. And if necessary, we will always be happy to add some additional budget meetings if we think it's.
Okay. I saw there's one coming up on the 5th, a budget work session on the 5th.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Maureen, I did not make it to the communication and engagement meeting last time, but is there a way that, I think last time we had a work session, although a lot of people looked at it virtually, only few people came to the meeting. But is there a way that community members can maybe, if there is a budget at hoh.gov email or something, that they can throw whatever questions they have at any time? That way you have a pocket of information that can be addressed in the presentation. Because sometimes individuals, they don't have the schedule or time to show up, or sometimes they just don't want to show up because they don't want to be in the public eye, and they would just decide among themselves with ill-informed understanding to vote a no. Not because they want to vote a no, but because they are not informed enough, and they don't want to be in the public's eye. So I feel like when people know and they think they can know when they want to know, it makes it easier for them to understand.
Well, one of the,
Let me go. So, the reason we've got this Maroon will follow, budget calendar here is so we can start being very public about the dates. And you as the board need to get the budget first and see it. And then once you've had it, there should be time we can structure in where it's posted publicly, people can see it. We have to be systematic, though, in answering the questions, because you're looking at the people here to answer the questions. So if we start spending a lot of time on 3, 4, 10, 15, 20 questions, we're not doing the other work. So I think that's where what I'd recommend is we can make extra effort around, here's now the budget that's out, it's before the board, even in that meeting could say, here's a time frame to be submitting questions. We'd go thematic and bring those back into a public forum to answer them then. I think that's the most efficient way. And my sense is most of the questions would line up with what the board questions might be, if that's fair.
That's fair. Thank you.
yeah, I agree with that. And I think although that is sort of what always occurs. So I think over the years, different people get their questions in different ways. Sometimes people email board members directly, or a board member may know somebody and they either give them a call or they have a question. I think what we do, as Bill said, we either try, many times there's similar questions to board members may have themselves, and then we're intentional about building in what we believe would be the answer to clarify that. And I think it is helpful to us as well, but I think as Bill said, we don't want to chase it down, but there's absolutely an opportunity to, as those questions come up, through board members, we're able to kind of address that and be purposeful in how we present information so that it clears up anything. And then we also use it in our Q&A and our budget newsletter. I'll incorporate a lot of those questions in there.
Hastings is not alone on this, which is, there are going to be people who feel they should get the answers to their questions immediately. Everywhere I've been, there's been that feeling. And this is a time to look to the common good in sharing, which is the common good in sharing is I'll submit my question, and Maureen and Melissa are excellent. If it's a quick hit answer, out goes the answer. That also feeds the expectation, but okay. But if it's a larger answer, group it with those other large questions, and then here's the common good sharing. You'll get your answer as part of the common good. But if you ask us and expect, and Hastings is not alone, okay, but if you expect it immediately, you're not going to get what you want because we're spending all our time on that particular, if I'm clear.
Yeah,
so new concept, honor the common good in the sharing, and you will get your answer. And that's what we'll do. And I'm not you, Dr. Lang, but you know what? I'm speaking through you to the Lord.
I know, I understand.
but it's very important
I totally
concept, or
understand.
else we just don't get anywhere,
Got it.
if
Yeah.
that's fair.
And I will say one last, so we have some suggested budget topics. This is just our throwing some things out there. You don't have to respond right now if the board thinks there's other information. Prior to the, as Alex mentioned, we'll have opportunities for board work sessions and other presentations that we can then start hitting on some of these topics prior to the formal budget presentation as well. One of the things that will be important is this is running parallel with our discussion around a potential capital project, right? So we're, a lot of the conversations, anytime you're considering and looking at what we're looking at there, I think we're going to be also, folding that into some of these conversations, if that makes sense.
Questions.
And we've gone, it's critical, I think, for you as a board, we've gone long. Hopefully, we're helping you understand what's coming to you with some efficiency. So if you keep in mind that graph I drew, the pressure on the cost is here and the revenue's here, you'd almost say, why can you do anything on this last slide? Having said that, there is a new phrase here, the second bullet, aspirational curriculum and programming. Was it last week? We talked about the need to say, we're a mature community, it's a mature relationship with you as a board. Let's take the risk to bring ideas forward to help you as a board understand and think what's there. So even if we can't do it right now, that we're trying to be aspirational. Yeah. We're not just being incremental, but the aspirational. So we're not sure. Right now we have a magnificent science research program. It's been a 2-year program. There's internal dialogue about making it a 3-year program, which would be a big boost to a number of students. It's a critical signature piece. It also kind of puts meat on the bones of where the portrait is, but that's an idea thinking, but that's not free. So there may have to be some decisions made. Engineering, robotics, there's been some fresh look at the middle school to say, we can do that much better with the AOKs or other things. Are there some new, rigorous ideas that we can be brought to, but that's not going to be inexpensive. The FTE, the class size issue is real. We have 3 middle school science, math classes that are north of 31 students. That's the kind of thing. So we will start bringing these to you. Last one, extracurriculars and athletics. We've had, this push and pull, just as Doreen mentioned, between the theater and modified sports. And how do you manage that and handle that? But there are cost issues there. So we still want to try, in the midst of a very tight financial picture, say, are there some places to be aspirational? And that almost cross-cuts all of these bullets. So that's not as much to get talked about tonight, but we just want the signal to you as a board. We don't want to just be incremental if we can help it. Tied into the portrait, but sort of where can we be aspirational and in a multi-year way?
Yeah, and I think, again, so the 5-year plan, again, we're speaking, when you look at those revenues, again, we're talking about a budget that's always tax cap compliant, and not to say that, but we also at times will bring things to the board, and there could be sometimes an incremental cost above a tax cap, but there may be times in which, that's how sometimes what occurs, not so much as sometimes there is something new and people support it and they want to fund it, and that's, so obviously we have a tax cap, but I mean, technically, if there was something above that, that the board wanted to support as part of our budget, then we would just, fold that in too, so.
Yeah. Excellent, Maureen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. We're going to move on to a report from our superintendent. Is there anything you wanted to pull out?
Yeah, 2 things. It's in the record. I think got into the record this afternoon. You can go back and look at it if you didn't have time. Some of what is here is what you may have seen in my Friday memo. But let me emphasize for everyone who sees the record, this report, the Blue Ribbon Commission on Graduation Measures, people in New York stayed for a long time, especially superintendents who I was with Friday, with the commissioner, see this as quite a potentially significant move. It's dramatically, potentially changing the whole framework by which we matriculate students out of high school here in the state of New York. And so I put in this material here. It's about a 70-page report, but what I put for you italicized were excerpts from the entire report. This report got national attention for one item, i.e. back and down shifting regents, because this state's one of the few states left that has something like a regent. So that got all the attention. Well, that's only one of 12 recommendations. So that's why I gave to you this other larger, if you will, framework that, I think you can read more clearly than I can, but the overarching needs create equity, this idea of gaining of knowledge for all students. Then 4 areas, this is the multiple pathways for the diplomas, assessment flexibility, real-life credentials, and the idea of culturally responsive curriculum instruction and assessment is very significant. And now the concept statewide of a portrait of graduate. And you can see the types of attributes that New York State would hope for those, for the portrait of the graduate. But I will come back with more on this as I learn more and understand more, but it's very, very significant. Tied to this in the meeting Friday was the bilingual what's it called?
Seal of biliteracy.
Thank you. So it was.
Which we've been doing.
Yeah, so
That's what I'm.
state representative came in, or state leader, excuse me, from NYSED came in, pushing, and that's one of the areas where we've been out there in front. And that's the type of seal, if you will, literally, that would become part of the multiple indicators in this whole new graduation measure. Last thing I'll mention, which is in the report, is we are moving, I think, at a good pace on the search for the new high school principal. Applications closed December 6th. Lynn wanted me to make sure what large meant here, because in the old days, large meant about 200 applicants. Large now means about 60 applicants. We think there may be about 30 very strong in that pool. Starting December 6th, as I mentioned, we'll close it and begin reviewing that. If all goes well, in January, an advisory committee will interview 3 or 4 from that group. I will then zero in on a single candidate, and if all goes very, very well, on February 6th, you will vote on that candidate, but you have an executive session opportunity several days ahead with that candidate, so you have a little time to engage and think about it. Let me say now something that's nowhere, but someone may be wondering, hey, you have an interim middle school principal, what are you doing about that? Well, I think the search process we're running now, that needs all of our attention. If the timeline works well, by the way through it, we'll be meeting potential candidates, because high school and middle school are different, but from that pool of 30 or so, we may see some that would relate well to the middle school. And if we stay on the timeline of you as a board on February 6th voting on the new high school principal, that's still plenty of time to immediately roll into the middle school search. Running 2 searches right now, it would be difficult for us, might even get a little confusing. So if we can keep to that sequence. But this is the first time I've been public and be public with your board about that, if that's not clear. So eyes are wide open on both searches. We're just trying to stage it a little bit, if that's clear. So let me stop at that.
All right, thank you. And as you mentioned, it's posted. Moving on.
Can I just ask a quick question of Bill? My concern about the 70-page document, which I have not read, about the getting rid of the regents and the new requirements.
Well, it's modifying, not getting rid of it. It's modifying. It's moving from 5 required to 4 plus 1. So it's slight. But go ahead.
I'd just keep us informed. I'm nervous about the academic rigor that is being pushed aside in a lot of places these days. This is how China wins. So they're not pushing aside math and, literature and all of that. So if you could just keep us informed as to what that means, and obviously we'll keep to the state, I'm sure we'll keep to the state requirements, but I know that you guys will want to keep up the academic rigor that we have here, but that's just my only concern when I hear things like that.
Yeah, I went through some of it, and to be honest, I think that it's not because I'm part of the board, but I see a pace-setting aspect that our school has in it. Like there is that, like Dr. Makesi mentioned one of it, that is something that Hastings is already doing, and they are now catching up, right? So I felt like some of it were things that I'm like, we got that, right? So, but there's other part that, and I get you, sometimes when we are so much concerned about other areas, we neglect the other areas, and that actually creates that unlevel path. Like we are trying to reduce hegemony, and then we use something to become the hegemony thing. The marginalized state is now being pushed as a hegemony when we are trying to bring equity. So I see, I get it. It gets annoying. That way you swing the pendulum. So I mean, one of the good things that I have the trust for our leadership team here is that they will navigate it. So I'm hoping, like, I'm not afraid of that document. I went through it and it's not as scary as maybe. I didn't catch a lot. I'm not in this work, so I can't even say anything until they tell us what they think. So
Yeah,
we'll
keep you posted.
Yeah.
I do think it opens the door for really creative, innovative potential. And thinking about, you know, embedded in this document, you'll actually see direct reference to this idea of portrait of a graduate and this competency-based learning and authentic assessment opportunities and how you build that in. So I love that idea, and I think that it can be a both and, meaning you have these creative competency-based experiences and also a very high level of deliberate rigor, so that it's not just about taking the test, but it's about applying what you know and doing it in ways that actually make an authentic difference and are relevant to real world. So let's see where they go with it, but I think it creates some opportunity.
Great, thanks.
And Doreen, if I hear you, if this was in a school that the leadership team did not know what they were doing, you can be very afraid. But here, I'm actually very happy about it because it's actually is.
No, I would agree with that. Dr. Szczepanski, we have your administrative reports. Anything you want to pull out of that?
No, I just wanted to give a special thank you to our thought partners at Model Schools, Leslie Accardo and Kelly Noka, who came in and led some professional learning around AI with our middle school team during their recent faculty meeting. So just a thank you to them, and we are exploring this and seeing what's possible. So.
Okay, thank you. And the report is posted online. So.
Yes.
We have, I guess, some additional updates from our business official, but she's not in the room at the moment, so we'll skip that. We'll go to public comment. There is no public, so we'll move on to business items. Are there any questions or comments regarding business items 1 through 8?
I'd like to just acknowledge a thank you to HEF. Number 1 is actually from a grant, so that is not being district funded.
Okay. Oh, Maureen's back. Maureen, we had just arrived at the business official report. I don't know, it said there was a construction update. I'm not sure if you wanted to put anything in there.
I think we have the facilities report at the end, right, Alex? Do we want, or we're?
It wasn't listed here, so.
Oh, I had shared it, but I didn't know. Okay, so, but I can just briefly, so we are continuing, we had our facilities meeting last week. We're going to upload the minutes to this agenda, and we don't necessarily have to go through them, but just, you know, as a first read, or if anyone has anything else to add. But I can't, did we report anything out last time? I'm trying to remember. I don't want to repeat myself.
I think we had some like headlines a little bit last time.
Right. So basically, we had the meeting. We went over, you know, just kind of where we were in the process. The architect reported out and provided a little bit of an update to the facilities committee. And we spoke about wanting to explore some different options for the fields. We talked about splitting, potentially looking at what is being proposed and either pulling out the maintenance type items like the boiler and some others, and maybe considering doing those as a separate vote or separate project to allow for us to further discuss any type of addition or field renovation. And I think we're kind of heading toward in that direction. So we did have a little, that was an update we provided the last time. And we also, I'm recommending, Joe and myself recommended to the board that we have this, it's as we look at options for the field, there are some different types of drainage options that we may want to consider as well. So I think we have another facilities meeting scheduled.
On the 27th.
Yeah, Monday coming up. So other than to say we're meeting frequently with our architects and with the facilities committee as we're really trying to get our arms wrapped around what we're considering as far as a capital project. And we hope to have, the reason I want the board to have a full update, but I want, we're kind of in a place where I think one more facilities meeting, and then we'll be able to have the board kind of similar. Last time I had the architects come and do a full presentation. So to do it every week, I don't think there'll be enough information to share, so that's it.
Okay. I look forward to that. Moving back to business items, and thank you, Dr. Jasmensky, for noting the HEF grant for Facing History. Are there any other questions or comments regarding business items 1 through 8?
I have comments about a few of them. So the Facing History one, it sounds like it's not really about teaching some sort of teaching lesson, but about teachers recognizing any bias they might have as teachers and trying to not bring that bias forward. Is that correct? Am I reading this correctly?
So it's actually part 2 of a series that we've done with the high school. So this would be middle school. And having participated in it, it's really around cultivating an equity-based lens and looking at the history of equity and thinking about historical barriers that have happened, and then thinking about how to be more inclusive in our approaches and approaching instruction from a space of making sure that we're creating environments that are welcoming and affirming for all students. So it's not about creating specific lessons, it's really addressing historical biases and understanding the history of inequity, and then thinking about basically inoculating that from occurring further by being very conscious and taking a stance where you're thoughtfully thinking about that in both your interactions with your students and also thinking about your content creation, your assessment practices. So it's more theoretical.
What, if you did it in the high school already, what were some of the things that came out of it?
So, I mean, in terms of some direct feedback, you know, people were actually quite positive in an anonymous survey, you know, and I'm speaking amorphously. So, you know, what came out of it? So there was reflection, there was considering, you know, thinking about what, the introspective reflective piece from a practitioner lens. There was nothing specific that happened at that professional learning workshop that went directly into now use this and put this in a lesson plan creation. It was more about cultivating an equity lens to be able to approach work.
Yeah, let me, if I may, I've known Facing History for a long time, and they're, I think, in my mind, one of the most rigorous groups that can get into this.
I remember we had it in one of our AOKs one year.
You know, Barbara Richmond's had the course.
Ross Abrams.
And Ross Abrams is a large advocate. I think, to put it very simply, they really go into the, while this isn't right now content, they're rooted in the content. They're rooted in the history.
Yeah, that's why I was asking about this one, because I know they're normally content-based, and this seems less.
Rooted in the history of the Holocaust originally, and it broadened out quite a bit. And typically, and I think that's what we heard last year, which was heartwarming to me, frankly, and that's the phrase, teachers usually leave it saying it's some of the best professional they've been through. So even if it's into what may seem jargony right now, it's rooted in deep sense of content, literature, and how you interact around that with students.
Right.
And so I typically feel, and I'm being personally most confident when we're involved with Facing History ourselves as we move into this work, and we're deepening it. And the lead-in on this one for the faculty engaging took a bit, because I came in with a, if you will, bias towards them. Fortunately, I had a couple of faculty equally attentive to them. We went through some discussion processes with Facing History ourselves that Janice and Melissa facilitated. I took a step back because my commitment was already known, and it's evolving step by step. So I think it's a good relationship to cultivate and keep moving.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because it seems less about content and more about ways of teaching and approaching teaching, maybe this one. And I asked about what happened from it, because while it's good for the individual teacher learning, it seems like the next step is all of the people who participated, the whole history group participating, getting together and say, okay, what does this look like for our curriculum? What does this look like? What are our next steps? Like, we take this learning. That's why I'm wondering, is it like individual learning so I understand my own biases, or is it like, okay, we get it, we did it, now the history team is going to come together and based on what we learned, how can we adjust how we teach or what we teach to reflect
actionable
this
steps.
learning? Exactly.
Yeah. I totally, I think that's what, I'm not sure, I mean, I'll leave the operational team to respond to that, but facing history and ourselves is a very good step towards empathy. And being cognizant of even the curriculum. So for example, I think I've said this before, I keep teaching my pre-med the cardinal signs of inflammation, whether I'm looking at white students or black students, and I keep using the word redness. And black students don't have redness as an inflammatory aspect, but we say it's cardinal. I have to change my lesson to fit. Yes, it's in the textbook because it was written by Western white folks, men to be precise. Even certain women, white women issues are not even recognized only because that research was not catering to them. And so as a scientist, you need to, facing history actually shapes not just history, but it actually shapes other forms of learning and that practical inclusivity. So it can never be prescriptive because it depends on your area of expertise. You have to be brought into that state of realizing that we are working with an aftermath of situation, that how can we move forward with it. Even when I'm teaching evolution, people are still, if they have a religious aspect to them, they are still opposing something that only because the history part, the social Darwinism part is flawed, and they've connected it. How can history help them understand a concept that is factual? So it's this is a very heavy, it's such an important thing that touches everything, to be honest with you. And it can never be prescriptive because the way that this will speak to you and how you would use it will be different from the way that it will speak to me and how I will use it. It has to just be done well.
I think I appreciate the question very much because I think there's a piece that is outcome based, and then there's a piece that's like direct resource and implementation based. So I can just speak a little bit more to that. So from an outcome based perspective, this particular series is grounded in helping people to better understand root causes of present day educational inequities. So that's more of the theoretical piece, like understanding that, being better prepared to engage in student-centered and culturally responsive classroom practices across content areas, thinking about cultural awareness leading to shifts in the classroom and other interactions with students and their families, and then improving academic engagement and motivation, civic responsibility and agency. So that's the theoretical piece. And from a resource-based perspective, the partnership with Facing History provides specific teaching strategies to support equitable teaching pedagogy, and then also some case studies, some units, some study guides. They send current events, any kind of webinars, teaching ideas, and then we also have access to what's called Community Matters, which is a unit for establishing student-centered spaces for schools with advisory groups. So we're working on an advisory group, but we do have access to very concrete resources as well. So I just wanted to speak a little to both the theoretical outcomes and the concrete resources piece.
I mean, I know a colleague that they did Facing History, and it was actually about how they discipline students in some of like the inequities in discipline, because as a black skin tone person, you just have your expressions and gestures to show your emotions, and then they tag them as a behavior thing when other people their color can, I think I've shared this before, when you turn red, they can see where you are emotionally. But for the black person, you will never know until they speak or until they show something, and then there's on-level discipline. And one is being called aggressive, one is being called blah, blah, blah. So, and there has been history of this inequitable discipline that has been going on with school kids. That just facing history and ourselves gives so much, I feel like it's not judgmental at all, because it allows the learner to reflect on their own process without it being on your face, right? So I think I feel it's a very good way of teaching this whole equity thing without it being nasty, right? So I really like it.
Yeah, and
Having
I hope it can come
participated
good
alongside
things.
the faculty in it, one of the most striking parts of the workshop was really digging into eugenics, the whole eugenics movement, and that was a very engaging and extremely powerful conversation. So just to give it a taste, and then some of that moves into, some of the historical inequities that have existed as a result of some things that have happened in the past, and how, as educators, really thinking about those things. And so even when we're approaching our spaces to make sure we are creating affirming environments, firmly understanding, what the past has had that has created a lot of barriers for a lot of people.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other questions for?
I have a question about, number 6. I was looking over these. Number 6, I don't think I ever realized that we have police officers. We need security at games. Is this common?
Yeah, that's not, I think, not at every game, like a modified, but certain of the larger varsity games where they anticipate, a certain amount of people to attend, they typically have a police officer there. But I think it's not always, it's also for like emergency services and other things that could occur at a game. So I think it's, obviously for safety and all the rest, so. And that's something that the athletic director makes a determination based upon the game and the event and
crowd size.
And the crowd size. So it's not always, it's just on certain events that the athletic director will contract the police officers through their budget, because they do have money for security, and at times they deem it better to have a police officer rather than just have security or chaperones, so.
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't realize. And then the number 8, the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. I love Alvin Ailey, so I'm super excited. I wish I could go see the performance. But I was just wondering, I see that there are performances here. I don't know if they do this, but I'm wondering if they have, if then the performers speak to the kids afterwards, because that would be really interesting to hear the journeys of some of the dances. I'm not trying to do the curriculum, I just think that would be really interesting, because I bet a lot of them have interesting stories.
We have a comment from a public person.
As a historian, many times when they do come, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
They spend time to talk with the kids and tell
The artists.
their journeys.
Right.
That all happens when they do come.
That's great. Yeah, because it is, we are a school that focuses a lot on going to college and higher education, so it's interesting to see other paths that people take, and plus Alvin Ailey's awesome, so that's great.
I think this is the first time I've heard Patrick speak publicly.
First time what?
First time I've heard him.
Right, exactly.
He's a font of knowledge.
Right, exactly.
Always here.
And then there wasn't, number 5, there wasn't a link. Was there supposed to be a link that we were supposed to look up?
It's executive link. Go down.
It's an executive content.
And this is because it's
Go
when
down, go
it's
down.
a negotiation, and it's written by council, so we
that's
have
your bottom?
to, yeah.
No, go,
Yeah.
You don't have it further?
No.
You don't have this?
Didn't log
No.
in, not in the.
Oh, you're not logged in, probably.
You
Oh.
have to join.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
Okay. I
that's-
don't even know how to do that. Okay.
Okay. But
All
yeah,
right.
that's
Thank
where
you.
it is.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a very small refund.
Yeah. Thank you both. Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 8?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Moving on to placement and services for CSE and CPSE. Are there any questions or comments about our placement services for CSE and CPSE? Is there a motion to approve our placement and services for CSE and CPSE?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to personnel, this is a consent agenda which we'll vote on. Are there any questions or comments regarding our appointments, amendments, or resignations? Is there a motion to approve our appointments, amendments, and resignations.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Oops. Thank you. Moving on to minutes. These would be for our November 7th meeting. Any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve board meeting minutes from November 7th?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to second read of policy 6710. This is on purchasing authority. So we're voting to pass this, is correct? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope.
Are there any questions or comments about it? Is there a motion to approve policy 6710 on purchasing authority? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Second public comment. Still no public. Agenda review for the upcoming, that's going to be December 5th. I saw we had a student sharing off the top. What's that report there?
Well, it was the idea prompted by some good board questions. You've got your high school presenters. It might be good to hear a little bit efficiently from the middle school and the elementary school. We're double checking this calendar still works. Scott and Amy had coordinated this, that FMS would go first. It'd be brief. And kind of a surprise for you on the students, what they would come share. And then similarly, Hillside would be up later. I don't have the exact, it's in the plan here. So we're confirming right now with Scott if this still will work for your next meeting.
Okay.
And then you would also have a budget work session.
An executive also, it's listed there, but that would be TBD, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we're back on Tuesday, that's December 5th.
Right.
It's a Tuesday.
All right. And then on the 19th, you'll have an update on the school calendar where we're on that. We are working on a survey process. We'll see if that'll be ready by then, or we need to think about that for early January. The feedback on that for early January.
December 19th, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Moving on, Board of
I just have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay.
We had talked a couple of months ago, Bill, about the having a report about gender studies in the elementary school. I'm just wondering if it doesn't. I don't care if it's tomorrow or next year. I'm just wondering if we're going to have something.
It would be.
Thanks.
Melissa, do you want to? We don't have not set a date yet, but we are
that's fine.
working on it. Actually, no, that's not true. We have a date.
March, I want to say March, hold on a moment.
Yep. Yeah,
Are you
so.
talking about the center lane?
Yes.
Yeah, so what's going to happen, we do have a
we have a
plan.
date.
What's going to happen, sorry, my brain caught up with me before Melissa caught up with me for once. That's rare. My brain beat Melissa. Have the record show. May never happen again. So there is a session for parents to which board members will be invited.
Right.
That's not a board meeting, but you'll be
Yeah.
invited. Following on that, there'll be a presentation here for you as a board
Perfect.
by both March 5th. So the February is the parent-family presentation, then you'll have the sort of next bite at the apple, but you'll be able, those who can get to that will be able to see it in action. We thought that was the best sequence.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, good.
And we should add that, we'll add that to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Board of Ed comments.
I do have a Board of Ed comment that I typed out that I'm going to read. And I know Hastings is a small place. I had one or two people reach out to me on some things, but I will try to be explicit here only because I think it's just fair in that regard. So I'll try and read it as much as I can. So, and I'm doing it just for the record purposes, and also just I know people are trying to come join the board and all those things. People have reached out to me on that regard, but so it's just going to be a mixture of different things. But I'll share two things that I've said since we came about our board process, and I just want to say it. And this has to do with the board, not the leadership team. They're amazing, and so I just want to. It's going to be explicit, but I want us to not take it in a negative way, so to speak. Okay, so so since I joined the board, I have consistently emphasized our board process in alignment with the permissible systems governing the work of a school board. As I said, I aim to be explicit about what I'm about to share so that it's a caution for all of us as we engage together in this very important work. This is especially pertinent because community members are sometimes feel perplexed that, which once upon a time it was me, that we could just shake the magic wand and everything would get fixed. So this is also something that I want to state for the record. And so, and more importantly, some of us or people that are thinking of joining, some of the issues seems to be significant community concerns tend to stall a lot, lingering with buzzwords with little or no progress, prompting questions about board actions. So I just want to share some light on just a process that is a collective process that we all know. We all are in different spaces in our lives and in our own professional spaces. So we all know that with any systemic change, time is a factor. And also being that we are a board and all boards in other countries are a collective body with diverse individuals with varying personalities, viewpoints, opinions, striving to emphasize and drive a collective work to support all kids, right? All kids. So that undertaking this collective work does not neglect and also maintain marginalization is difficult. So I personally, before I joined the board, I extensively binged on a lot of board meetings, watched a lot of Hastings board meetings, and one of the things that I witnessed was various levels of assertive dialogues, and ranging from aggressive assertions, unpleasant, but for me they were transparent, so I was okay with it, to very passive ones that were elusive and manipulative as well. But I say all of this to say that there is all these pitfalls, and we know this is a system that is not different from the public systems that we all have, that we are all faced with in our different circles. But one of the things that I learned from binging on all these things is to hear what people are saying, regardless of what I think about them, because the human part always plays a role. And that was what I learned from binging on those board meetings that I watched. Like I just told myself I'm going to eat popcorn and watch it back to back to back, and I did. And I realized that, you know, sometimes I will be looking at people and I'm like, I don't like her. Like, and you know, and I've been public about this. Doreen and I fought a lot, right? I mean,
I would say disagree.
Disagreed a lot, I would say, right? Wrong choice of word. But one of the things that I would say that we still disagree on things, you know? And like, I don't hide the fact that I'm a person of faith. She's publicly said she's an atheist, so I can't say it here. But one of the things I know is that if I don't listen to her, equity can never happen, because I would drive my interest over hers. And so for me, that's one thing that I learned. But I want to just go straight to what I want to share today, which I feel we should be very, 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 very concerned about, and not to make it a normal thing. The first concern is, I'm not saying we are doing that, but appearance of censoring or altering or deletion of board input in an attempt to create a summary is not allowed in a collective board meeting. It's not allowed in a school board. It's not allowed. It's not permissive. We can go back to NISBA and check ourselves, or go back to our training. So sometimes there appears to be an emerging trend that violates the established working of school board collective system. The board any board member, including a president, does not hold an executive control of any board member's input. Unlike, it's different from a mayor thing, right? So while individuals or a fraction of a group of individuals may hold views, those views must be presented when anything is being presented under the collective board. That's why the minute states exactly what we say. I cannot summarize your words because it would bring the wrong meaning. And there are systems in place that require us to have special meeting and be there all together in those meetings. And so that is one, I mean, like in the name of summarizing, we can take meanings out, and it's not something that a school board is supposed to be doing. You want to put the words of what the person wants to say in any collective thing that we are submitting as a board action. So I want us to be careful about that. The second part is sidebars. I've always talked publicly against sidebar. As a person of color, sidebar is never something that favors black folks that are in a work like this, because there's a lot of blind spots, and it's not because anybody's doing anything bad, it's just blind spots.
What's a sidebar? What do you mean?
So I'm going to read it so that I'm succinct. So sidebar, let me just say sidebar instead of trying to be all reading. So sidebar is when we have to make a board action, and I call you and discuss it with you in order to shape your decision before we meet in the official allowed space, whether it's executive session or regular session. So there's supposed to be, I can, like I reach out to you about your car, that's fine, right? It's not, I can reach out to you about anything, but if it's something about a board action, I'm influencing your decision before we actually meet together. So we are not allowed to sidebar. It's not permissible. In that for us to create it. And so in recent times it's being normalized as if, I just want to caution us, I'm not saying we are doing that as a norm, but normalizing sidebarring in our collective work reinforces unhealthy dynamics, and even sometimes it can bother within power dynamics depending on the group that is here. You know, we always change every year, right? Who knows who wants to continue or not. So I just want us to be careful about that. And I'm going to give some examples as to why, number one, it's not permissible, but why I think it's also can be very dangerous. So number one, sidebarring initiatives often speculate an innocent, seemingly innocuous process that sometimes can influence biased decision-making stance, like I just said to you. There's also loss in translation, and that can also be very unhealthy. There is also no means of fact checking. I can say, oh, Doreen, and this is what Doreen means. How are you able to check when I'm the only one talking to you? You know, there's that problem, no fact check, there's lack of transparency. So like I said, I can, and for me as a neurobiologist, the most damaging part is that if I create a baseline to have a sidebar with you, I am presenting a baseline where the conversation is going to sit. So like I just said, Doreen is an atheist. She said this publicly, I'm a Jesus girl. There's something about prayer in school or whatever, and I sidebar each of you. I'm going to start with a base that will promote that, right? And all the conversations will be about that. And then at the end of the day, going to each of you, I've created that, be it sympathy or empathy even, to feel how, you know, this is, and then she becomes the marginalized person in that. Instead of meeting at a special meeting, whatever it is, and discussing it so that when there is a misconception or misconstruction or miscommunication, it just checked right there and there. But your brain will just get back to that basal instinct based on your emotions of, like maybe you're not agnostic, you don't really care, but I say something that is a little bit damaging, right? On her part, you will go with your basal instinct on that. So again, the history, if you look at why some of these, like I looked at why we have OML laws and all those things, it ties into the HS, the human nature of engagement, and that's why some of these things are there. So I would ask that we just try to work. I know we are doing wonderfully, but I'm just mentioning these two things, that we are more careful with our board process, and I'm hoping that we will create a board process that would allow all of us to work, continue to work well like we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Any other
Yeah,
comments?
thanks. I just want to say thank you, Damaris, for saying all that. I agree with you, and I appreciate all the hard work you've done. If you look at me on a piece of paper and you on a piece of paper, people would say these people have nothing in common.
That's true.
But when we talk, we find that we actually have more in common than we don't. So I think that you're always very open to other people's opinions. I've always admired that about you. So thank you for that. And then I just wanted to make a comment about, I sent around something to the board and the super about the school in Florida that banned phones in schools. And I think that was a super bold move, and not surprisingly, they found that children are more engaged and there's less bullying and they're studying more, and and all of that. And I know that admin thinks I beat this drum all the time, and as long as I'm on this board, I probably won't ever stop beating this drum. But right? But yeah. As I said to you guys, fortune favors the brave and bold, and it's not an easy decision to do. I can't think of a single negative reason to banning phones in school. I can't actually think of one single negative reason for doing it, but I could probably list for you about 25 to 30 positive reasons. So I just will continue to bring it up. This is an experiment that a school in Florida did. They have like 200,000 people in their district, and just something I would love to consider here. Thanks.
I would in just going on that screen train of thought, the Chromebooks are allowed during lunch, and my children tell me that everybody gathers around whoever has a Chromebook and they watch YouTube. So I would love to see that go away, because then they're not dialoguing. I don't even have to say what's wrong with that. So I would just put that out there as maybe something we can talk about.
I'm in.
Yeah, if you want, I can. It helps that you all are in such good touch with us, because neither of these are surprises, plus some other families have been raising the Chromebook concern. And last spring, when I did a series of roundtables from the students and and parents, middle school, there was a lot of concern about Chromebook usage. And so Melissa and I have talked about that. Scott Wynn and I have talked about that. Scott Wynn's been talking with faculty about it. I'm in the lunchroom enough to say, yes, they're on. There's not a gathering around, though. I'm in the lunchroom a lot. People tease me how much I'm in there. But it's one place I can get to have some visibility and a sense of things. So, yeah, we have a problem. We have to address it. It's not what you're hearing. So there are lots of tables where the Chromebooks aren't up and students are doing what else they might do. But I think on the phone usage issue and the Chromebook issue, I think we have to optimize what's happening, because there is productive and constructive use of cell phones. We do not allow them at the middle school. We do not allow them at the elementary. And this year in the middle school, we've been cracking down on it. And we'll continue to crack down on it. Tough term, but that's actually some of the terminology from the Florida school, from I think the superintendent or principal there. I think at the high school, I think we have to talk about it and think about it, because you're not asking to do this, but if you as a board unilaterally said eliminate Chromebook usage at the lunch and eliminate cell phones, and some school boards do that, you would have a bigger problem in your hands, because you'd have faculty who said, wait a minute, you didn't talk to us. You have students say you didn't talk to us. So I think the core of the issue is optimizing screen time. Getting it to the right level and the right amount for educational purposes, appropriate recreational purposes, and then when it's not that, how do we limit that? Facebook access within the district is there in part because teachers from a teaching standpoint need, YouTube, need access to YouTube, not Facebook, need access into YouTube. You can say, I'm dating myself when I talk about any technology, but they need access into YouTube for some legitimate instructional purposes, but then they get there. So I think that's a lot of words. Melissa and I have talked about it a lot within the AI look within authentic instruction. I'm saying we have got to get our arms around Chromebook and phone usage to figure out what's the best way to make that work. I've begun to just informally chat with students a bit about the cell phone piece, and there are multiple sides and aspects to it. We're one of the few high schools anywhere nearby that's at least doing the pouches in the high school, so that's a big step. So I think it's then trying to build on that. But it's going to, a lot of words here, but the point is we've got to be thoughtful and systematic about it, because you push here and all this stuff goes like this on you. And so we have to think about it. Final thing is, in looking at it, you're looking at the team that will look at it. And so then it depends how serious you are as a board, because that means we may have to do some other things strategically we're not going to do right now to grapple with that. We just have to think it through. So that's why I'm trying to, final comment, see how much within the portrait work on AI and authentic learning we can dig into these two issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think, and to your point, Bill, I'd happily put a vote to the board and see how many board members are interested in talking about how we limit screen time.
We're definitely interested in limiting it too.
Yeah.
I think the issue is,
and to your point about the teachers would say, you're not asking us. I'd love to know from a teacher's point of view if there's why they would want phone usage in between classes and at lunch. I'm genuinely curious. Like I said, I can absolutely think of 0 reasons why it would be good. So I'd be very curious to hear from someone to educate me, honestly, about why that might be something that's necessary.
So I'm not saying, I think what you as a board then need to talk through is, as you look at, that's why we did the agenda planner, is you look at the agenda planner, because I think what you'd want to do is thoughtfully hear from students. You would thoughtfully want to hear from the high school principal and assistant principal about the merits, pros and cons of the between class usage of phones. And then took the big step to have the pouches. You go to most high schools around here, it's willy-nilly with these things. We've at least taken the step to at least park them during classes and all the rest. And it's interesting when you talk to students, they say if between the pouches and backpacks, well, how are they going to police that? How are they going to make sure I'm actually not using it? So I think it's the right question. It's trying to understand what you get when you get there. And is it going to be what we'd hope? But you got to look at it thoughtfully, is what I'm saying. But if as a board you want to do it, I'm saying don't do that. But then just think about what are some of the other things then that we're going to back off on to do it, to take the look correctly.
I think that.
Ask one
Yeah.
question, Doreen. So there is elementary, there's middle school, and there's high school. I think the high school can be on a different conversation.
The high school is the only place where we have the flexibility.
The high school allows it.
Not
in classrooms.
What about the middle schools?
No,
Not
not at all.
Not
They're
at
found, they're
all.
confiscated.
Yeah.
So this is a high school.
I'm talking
Purely a
specifically
high
high school, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we did take the step to, in class time, have them in the pouches.
Including the Chromebook thing?
No, Chromebooks a middle school issue.
Middle
Yeah,
school
that's
issue,
what
okay.
yeah.
But the phone is high school issue, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think it's like, I appreciate wanting to talk to the students about it, but it's kind of like, you don't know what you don't know. The students will think that they can't live without their phones because they think they can't live without their phones. I'd be very interested in an experiment, 1 week, 1 month, where you're not allowed to use your phone and see what happens, and then ask students what they think of the process. But if you ask them about it now, they're going to say, of course we need our phones. We need our phones for X, Y, and Z, because they don't know what it's like to live without their phones.
The following, I hope, is taken very respectfully. You want to do this in a board-level process.
Got it.
Because to say to students you can't use your phone, that is a management move. That is you as a board stepping into a management function operationally, saying in the high school, where you've actually had a principal and assistant principal get out in front of most districts around us on this very issue to limit access, and it was a win. Very few have complained. That you want as a board, I think that's why I'm saying you need to go through the process of a discussion and listening, and then see where you land. Because there are school boards who would vote to say, you put the motion on the table today, vote, boom, phones are gone. And then I can tell you, you are in a bad place with your teachers and all the rest, even as much as just, hey, the board is just swept right in.
I'm not suggesting that at all, Bill. I'm saying that this is something that I would like I would hope, and I think that I have a lot of colleagues who would agree with me, that this is something that should be seriously considered and seriously looked at. And when you think about a school that does, that a district that has done it and is successful at it, that's just one, but I would rather be leaders than followers always. And, you know, I would love to get ahead of something and prove how something can work versus waiting for everybody around us and then we're following and, you know, our kids are following behind. I would never tell you how to run the school. I'm always just bringing this up because I think it's a serious issue and it's important to me and I think it's important to our kids. How you guys manage it is obviously how you guys manage it.
Okay, thank you, all of you. Any other board comments? No? Is there a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So
Is there a second? All in favor? Thank you. Thank you.